Morning. Welcome to Let's Get Growing Facebook Live. It's another ridiculously cold day in March, but spring is not that far away. We were in a garden center yesterday. The pansies were out. Well, a few pansies were out, not the bulk of them, but a few were out to get started. A few pots of forest bulbs. We'll be talking about all that stuff in the upcoming weeks, doing our spring containers. We did pick up our pansies for our spring containers because I wanted to get them now in 4-packs, and then I'm going to throw them into 4-inch pots so they're bulked up and ready for a couple of weeks from now when we do our spring containers, when we can actually get outside. But we're still in the greenhouse, so we're going to talk about a fun group of plants that a lot of people always try and often don't have a lot of success with, and that's carnivorous plants. Carnivorous plants can be a lot of fun, especially for kids, because, you know, how cool is a plant that eats bugs for its nutrients and not rely on fertilizer and things like that like typical plants. So we've been at a couple of places the last couple of weeks, picked up a small little group of plants. I'll quickly discuss them, and then I think we're probably going to work at repotting one of those. So we'll talk a little bit about soil mix as well. So I think the most common plant that people initially get as a carnivorous plant is the Venus flytrap. They're very cool. They're a lot of fun because they actively will trap insects, and you can watch them trap insects. So that's a very cool thing for kids, especially, to get them into gardening and the interest in plants. So one thing that you have to remember about the Venus flytrap is that it's not a tropical plant. Venus flytraps grow naturally in one swamp in North Carolina. So that means that they are exposed to winter conditions. They do need a winter rest, and that's where a lot of people fail with them. They think they're a tropical plant that you're going to keep hot and humid all the year round, and then you rot them and kill them. Venus flytraps actually, you know, this one's actively growing. This would be about the time you would start getting them growing. And the neat thing about them is that they have a little bulb or a rhizome under the soil that goes through a dormant period. And that dormant period, like begonias, dahlias, canna lilies, they need to have a cool, dormant rest. So you can actually take the bulbs out of the soil and put them in a Ziploc bag, put them in your refrigerator for a period of time in the winter to give them that cold rest that they need. You don't keep them growing hot and humid year round. I know people who have actually overwintered these in boggy gardens as far north as Michigan. So maybe this one here is big enough. We'll split a piece off and we'll try it out in our bog this summer. I'd love to have it as a permanent bog plant. So we'll see if we can get one growing out in the bog, this summer. But the neat thing about the Venus flytraps is they have this modified leaf here that looks like Little Shop of Horrors or something. And on that leaf, and you can't really, they're so thin they're hard to see, but there's little hairs on the flat part of the trap. And when a fly or a bug gets on there, they have to trip 2 or 3 of those in succession for the trap to close. So the trap uses a lot of energy to close, so it doesn't want to do it if it doesn't have to. So if something just fell in there, a leaf bit or something, then it probably won't close. But if it moves and triggers a few of those hairs, the traps will close. If they get a good catch, they'll seal themselves shut. Enzymes will be secreted, and then they dissolve the insect that's in there and suck all the juices out into the leaf, and that's where they get their nutrients. the bogs they grow in are very nutrient poor, so the plants have developed this method of getting nutrients from insects. The soil mixes are very, very nutrient poor. We never fertilize them and nothing like that. There's a neat variety of Venus flytrap that's becoming more common now. That's the red one here, which is very cool. And there's actually a lot. If you really get into carnivorous plants, there's a lot of different selections of the Venus flytraps out there. So they're a lot of fun. Another plant that grows in bogs and swamps, like the Venus flytrap, are the Sarracenias. Now the Sarracenias are a pitcher plant where each leaf, so here's a leaf here, is developed into a tube with an opening in the top. At the bottom of the tube is some very sweet liquid that attracts insects into it. They go in through the hooded part of the leaf at the top tube here, and then they slide down and then are digested by the plant down at the base. Sarracenias are interesting because there are Sarracenias from Florida all the way up to Ontario and Newfoundland and things. You may know Newfoundland's flower is the pitcher plant, one very much like this one, and it grows wild all through northern Ontario, over into the maritime provinces, and it's a fully winter hardy plant. But again, it grows in very nutrient poor bogs, so that's the conditions you have to grow it in. You can grow them in containers. Some of the southern ones wouldn't be hardy, but are magnificent. This is just a baby, so as with most of these plants, the next leaves that grow, you'll see the first leaves were very tiny, the next ones that grow get bigger, the next ones that grow get bigger, and if this was one, I think this is one of the Sarracenia purpureas, much like our native one. They're not always labeled as to variety, unfortunately, so you can you're not always sure unless you're going to a specialist grower. But they can. I lost my train of thought there for a second, Laura. They grow in the bogs. They grow in the nutrient-poor soil. The southern ones, what I was getting at, can get to be huge plants and be quite stunning. You can get, leaves that stand up about this tall that are very colorful hoods and things, and are really cool plants. They would need some winter protection up here. I doubt they'd be winter hardy as they're coming from northern Florida, Alabama, Georgia, through those areas. But sometimes they surprise you. Another group that really grows all around the world that I think is quite amazing are the sundews. Now the sundews are really cool. We actually have sundews that are native to Ontario. If you go along swamp edges and things, you'll see similar ones to this guy. Now this guy's got some flower stalks that I'm going to trim off. Flora passes me a pair of scissors there if she can reach them. Yeah, that works. I'm just going to get rid of a few of these yucky old seed heads. Oh, that was not the right pair of scissors. Oh, well, hang on a second. I got a pair. There we go. Those other ones were headed for the garbage pail. So I'm just going to take off these old flower stalks here just to let you see a bit better. And then we're going to talk about the flower stalks too, because that's interesting. So what the sundews have, and you can see it on this guy here, is they have little sticky hairs on the leaves. Can you see those, Laura? Can you make those out?
No, not yet. There.
Not really, right about there. I don't know if I put my hand, but so this part of the leaf is covered in little red sort of hairs, and at the end of each hair there's a little blob of sticky stuff. What happens when a bug comes and lands on that sticky stuff, on that leaf, the sticky stuff grabs them and traps them, and then the leaf will kind of curl around them a little bit until it gets lots of those little hairs on them, and then it dissolves the bug from that point on. But like I said, there are sundews from the tropics to the Arctic. So depending on where you're getting them and what species you've got, that will dictate how you're growing them. Now the fun thing is a lot of these can grow on light stands in the house, so you can really have a great collection of tropical or of carnivorous plants indoors. The other group we've got here today are the tropical pitcher plants. Now these become a whole sort of different ball game from these other guys. But the tropical pitcher plants are really cool. You're seeing them available in stores quite widely now, because some of the hybrid ones like this guy are pretty easy to grow. So we're seeing them available in general garden centers, sometimes even in grocery stores and things. You'll see displays of Venus flytraps and of the tropical pitcher plants. Neat thing about tropical pitcher plants is, like you see, they grow these neat pitchers on the end of a leaf. So this new leaf here is growing, and right at the tip there, a little trap is forming. And as they grow, the leaves get bigger and the traps get bigger. So these are just real babies. So they are forming some good traps already. Pretty cool. There they are here. And this one's quite dramatic because it has sort of a long piece on that leaf and it holds the traps really well. So that's kind of a neat one. Now these traps do the same. This one's not quite open yet, but they have sort of a lid, again, that will allow open and allow bugs to go down in them. Then they get stuck in there, dissolved in digestive enzymes in here, and then feed the plant. Now the tropical pitcher plants are a bit more like growing orchids. I think that's sort of the easiest thing to equate them with. They're epiphytic, they hang in the trees, just like orchids do. So we treat them in a very similar fashion, with the exception being that they grow, again, in very nutrient-poor situations. So we do not fertilize them ever. And we don't use soil mixes that have fertilizer in them. So we don't use things like, you know, our ProMix, not ProMix, but like a Miracle Grow soil mix, things like that that has any kind of nutrients, because those nutrients can kill the plants. They don't like the fertilizer salts and things like that. And when we're watering them, and you notice a lot of these are bog plants, so they're sitting quite damp all the time. We're using rainwater or distilled water or reverse osmosis water. Don't use tap water ever. Don't use water softener water. We can't use our well water to water them because our well water has got a lot of calcium in it, and they won't like that. So we use rainwater out of our rain barrel. Or right now, we just go out, we scoop out a big bucket of snow, let it melt and warm up, and we use that water. So, soil mixes. This is a very important aspect of growing the plants. Usually when you buy them, they're in just sphagnum moss, long fiber sphagnum moss. I'll show you this guy here. And long fiber sphagnum moss, I think is fine for short-term planting. You can see the plant's roots are getting all through it and things. But I don't know. I don't have good luck growing things in the sphagnum, the long fiber sphagnum moss for very long. Some growers like to use it, you know, for their philodendrons and all sorts of things like that. But I'm not a big fan. So you can treat these tropical pitchers much more like an orchid and use orchid mixes for them. So there, there's lots of roots there. There's a little bit of moss here still, but you can sort of see how they're growing there. We got lots of roots coming. So we're going to put this into an orchid mix, and I'm going to put it into a little hanging basket, because the tropical pitcher plants really are sort of hanging basket plants. They like that. That's how they grow naturally. So I got an orchid mix here. Now this one is cocoa fiber chunks and perlite. And it's a nice loose mix, right? You can see. But the perlite allows the cocoa fiber to not clump down, and it stays nice and open and airy, which is very important for the pitcher plant. So we're going to take the pitcher, hold it in there, get in some of that mix. It's nice and moist in the bag already. Firm it down a little bit. And that might be a bit over potted at the moment, but I think that will probably make that a very happy plant within a short period of time. Now again, remember, we're not going to water that with our regular fertilizer or our regular water. We're going to use rainwater, and I've got a bucket of rainwater beside me that we'll water it in with. Now the one thing about these tropical pitchers is, like I said, they're a bit more like orchids. So indoors, our houses are usually not humid enough to grow them really well. So you might need to have an area in a plant room where you increase the humidity, or try growing them in terrariums, especially while they're young. Can work. I mean, here in the greenhouse, we can grow them with our greenhouse other tropicals, then they should be fine. But you do need to grow them in some good humidity. Or what happens, and kind of the neat thing about the tropical pitchers, if they're not happy, if they're not growing in the conditions that they want to grow in, what they will do is they'll tell you that they're not happy in the conditions by not growing traps on the ends of their leaves. That's sort of their first signal that it's not humid enough, they're not getting enough sunlight, the soil conditions or watering conditions aren't right. Something's not right about them if they don't form traps. So that's a great indication. If you've got a good growing plant and it looks okay, but it's just green and it's not growing any traps, you've got to come up with what's wrong, fix something there. So it will grow traps, because eventually, if it doesn't have traps, they're not going to be able to get food, so they're going to be less happy. So you just need to figure that out. More often than not, it's probably a lack of humidity or a lack of sunlight. Now, interesting thing about these plants is that all these grow in boggy places. The nepenthes, the tropicals, are growing in trees and shrubs, but again, where it's constantly sort of damp. But they don't necessarily have a lot of shade where they are growing. So they are more or less full sun plants, or at least full sun for part of the day. You know, you think about Levinus flytrap in a swamp. They might get shaded by some grasses and things, or some sedges, but essentially they're going to be in quite a sunny spot. We've seen our native pitcher plants, these guys, we've seen these in Algonquin Park bogs growing on mats of peat in the full sun. They take on a beautiful maroon color, and I'm hoping this one will too, because it was labeled maroon. So, you know, they do like a lot of light. The tropical pitcher plants do like at least a half a day of good full sun to bring out good colors in the traps and good plant health. Same with the sundews and things. We've seen these growing on floating logs out in a swamp where they're not getting sort of any shade at all. So they're out in full sun in the constantly damp soil. Now, soil mix for some of these other guys, you'll see this guy is in a bit more of what you would consider a soil mix. But what you do, and I just didn't have a bag of it with me today, but we'll repot some of these guys later on and talk more about them. But for your other carnivorous plants, like your Venus flytraps, your Sarracenias, your Drosseras, usually a 50-50 mix of peat moss and perlite is ideal. And by peat moss, I don't mean the growing mixes that we grow everything else in. Your mixes like Pro Mix, Berger Mix, those kind of grower mixes, while they are peat moss based, they are balanced in their pH with gypsum and things like that. So they have a pH of 7, very neutral, and then you can alter that a bit depending on what fertilizers you use. Well, you can't do that with carnivorous plants. So you use straight peat moss, like when you buy a bag of peat moss as a soil amendment. You use straight peat moss, 50-50 with perlite, wet it down, get it all mixed together, and that is your basic standard mix for your carnivorous plants. Except for the Nepenthes, we'll tend to use those like a more of an orchid mix, where they're a bit more open and we keep them going. I think Laura looks like she has a question there, maybe.
There's a couple.
You got a couple of questions?
Deborah would like to know when she should wake up her dahlia tubers.
Waking up dahlia tubers. You know what? Now is a great time to do that. We bought a couple last week. Let's have a look and see what they're doing. Because now is a good time to get them started. Because in most cases, I'll take this one out of the bag here, you're going to see that this one has a nice little shoot started right here. So get them potted up now if you've got room. If you don't, you can wait. You know, you can always put your dahlia tubers right out into the ground from this stage in May. But remember, you're going to get very late flowers that way. We're starting our dahlia tubers now because we want to move out growing plants that have rooted into the garden in May. So we want to get a head start. Some of our smaller ones actually will already be producing flowers in May when we put them out, which is great because we don't grow them as a cut flower or as a competition flower for fall blooms. We want them in our containers all summer long, so we get them started now. The other benefit is if you've bought one, like this media right here that looks like it's going to have some really nice dark foliage with that yellow flower. I bought one, but I might like to have more. So when you get them growing now, once you've got good shoots on them, you can take cuttings, root those cuttings, and the cuttings will be blooming plants this summer as well. So you can really get good bang for your buck if you're paying $8 or so for a tuber, and you can take a cutting or two off that and have 3 or 4 plants this summer. Great deal. So get them started now. When you're looking at your tubers out of the bag, look for this spot here. This is last year's stem. Of course, there is a bud for this year, so you're going to plant them at about that level. I wonder, Laura, if we can spin around, I can probably plant up this guy here. We've got the soil right here. So we get a bit of our prepared mix. That's our standard mix we use for everything. Tuber in. Hold it at about the level that you, here, we get rid of that dead stuff. Hold it at about the level of where it should be sitting in the pot. More soil in the pot. Firm it down a little bit. And there we go. There's our potted dahlia tuber, ready to be watered in and start growing, and is going to give us some cuttings and going to be a nice blooming plant early in the season. Much earlier than if you wait until May to do that. So if you've got the room, get them out, get them started. Is there any other questions, Laura?
Yes.
Okay.
So Sophie has two questions. One, would these carnivorous plants work for fungus gnats? And if so, which one is the easiest to grow?
Well, and that's actually a great question, because if you're gardening indoors, and I know Sophie does a lot of her pre-starts and stuff right now, and fungus gnats can always be a problem. So having a few carnivorous plants around on your light stands is a great way to help control fungus gnats, because the fungus gnats are attracted to them. I would go with the Drosera's, any of these guys. This one is kind of hard to see. It looks like a green blob, but it's got tiny little round leaves that are all covered in the sticky hairs. Drosera's are great. And there's another one that we didn't have here today that is another excellent one for fungus gnats, and that's called butterworts, or pingicula. And they have a little rosette, look like a little flat echeveria almost, and they're excellent as well. They have sticky flat leaves that the fungus gnats love to land on, and you know, I think are probably the best way to sort of biologically control fungus gnats in your light stand situation. So just have these, you can have these sitting like this, have them sitting in a saucer that's got a little bit of the water in them all the time, keep them damp. They grow well under lights and will keep producing new leaves with lots of sticky stuff on them and do a great job. The Venus flytraps are a lot of fun, but you got every trap, once it closes on an insect, it's going to be closed for a couple of days. So maybe not as efficient for fungus gnats as the sundews would be.
And Sophie is wanting to grow passion vine this year.
Yeah, passion flower vines, yeah.
When should she start the seed, and could she expect flowers this season?
I would get the seed going right away, because passifloras or passion flowers, seed can take quite a long time to germinate. So if you're growing them from seed, get them started right away. I would keep the seed warm, keep it on a heat mat probably. That may help speed up germination. Will you get flowers first year from a passion flower? That's a bit of a maybe. Little hard to say. I know garden centers will usually have 2 or 3 varieties of passion flowers in pots available. If you want the edible ones, Richter's Herbs has usually 1 or 2 varieties of the edible passion flowers. And they probably grow them from cuttings, which is going to give you faster flowering. Certainly from a cutting you'll get blooms this year. From seed, probably, but they're not going to be like a Morning Glory or something like that, where you're going to get, you know, lots of production in that first year from a young plant. Passion flowers are perennial plants or woody vines, so you know, first year is not necessarily the plant's goal for creating flowers. Usually the first year of a woody plant goes into producing a good root system and a good strong crown before they start thinking about flowering well. So flowering might be iffy. Seed germination is slow. Use your baggy method, because you could be looking at seeds for up to a couple of months before they sprout, and you don't want to lose them in a soil mix. But sometimes it's the only way to get cool varieties and cool species is to grow them from seed.
And Paula would like to know when you are having your first plant sale.
When are we having our first open day? I don't know. We still have 2.5 feet of snow on the ground. So I have no idea. We're going to shoot for late April. But watch the website. It's just being updated right now, so there's no plants on it yet, but there will be plants on it this week. We'll have our perennial list there for pre-orders, and hopefully shortly after that we'll have our specialty annual list and our heirloom vegetable list on there as well, all for pre-order. Our first sale, like I say, we're shooting for late April. We'll have to just see what the weather brings in the next couple of weeks and how much ahead or behind we're going to be for the month of April. It's about all I can tell you at the moment. Can't give you a firm date right now. But anyway, that's enough chattering for today. Go look out for some carnivorous plants at your garden centers. They are a lot of fun. They do like specifics, though. There are some great websites out there, some great carnivorous plant companies that can give you a lot more in-depth things on different plants. Like one thing I mentioned, we talked about tropical pitcher plants, but when you get in the tropics, and if you grow orchids, you know that there are some varieties that like warm conditions, some that like intermediate, some that like cool. So if you get into those species that like cool conditions, it's really hard to make your house, 10 degrees Celsius in the summertime to accommodate them. So you want to look for ones that like sort of warm or intermediate conditions, much like orchids. So if you're already smitten with a few orchids, try a few carnivorous plants right along with them. We're going to wrap up for now. Like I say, watch the website for updates. They will be coming soon. Open days through the year will be posted as soon as we get them nailed down. And we do have a couple of spots left on our great garden tours for this year. June into July for England and the Hampton Court Flower Show, which is a spectacle that you just have to see. And our August trip, which is Ireland and the southern part of Scotland. They're both going to be magnificent. We have some special garden hosts that are going to join us. It's always wonderful to visit a garden with the gardener. They really give you some great insight into the garden. So we'll have many of our gardeners will be there with us at some of the places we visit. So those are up on the website. Have a look at those trips. Think about it. Join us. We'll have a great time. And for now, that's it for Let's Get Growing Facebook Live. We will see you next week.